Was any of those nights I'd been out late at a friend's house enjoying some laugh-safe drinks and a lot of meaningless conversations. It wasn't anything wild, just a quiet evening of catching up, but by the time I decided to leave it was nearing midnight and the streets were almost completely deserted. I like driving at night, but that night as I pulled onto the highway, I noticed my fuel gauge dipping alarmingly close to empty. I sighed. Of course, I hadn't thought about it earlier, and out there in the middle of nowhere there was only one option, a small 24-hour gas station I'd passed a few miles back. It was one of those places that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 80s. The neon sign outside flickered weakly, half the letters missing or burnt out. I pulled in under the dull glow of the single overhead light parked beside the pump and turned off the engine. The station was completely empty. No other cars, no sign of life inside the convenience store, just met the pump and the eerie stillness of the night. The moment I stepped out of the car, I felt that strange sensation that comes over you when you're completely alone but somehow you feel watched. I shook off the feeling and grabbed my wallet, telling myself I was being ridiculous. It was just late, I was tired. I started pumping gas, leaning against the car while the fuel flowed. I stared off into the distance, listening to the soft buzz of the overhead light, the rhythmic click of the gas pump. It should have been calming, but the silence felt oppressive. The more I stood there, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I glanced around the lot again. Nothing, just the same empty lot, the same dimly lit station, no movement, no cars passing on the highway. Then as a widucked under my windshield wiper was a small piece of paper. I frowned, staring at the note for a few seconds before curiosity got the better of me. I finished pumping the gas, put the nozzle back in its place, and cautiously walked around the cart. The note was small, folded haphazard, the edges if it had been crumpled in someone's hand. I pulled it out from under the wiper and unfolded it, my heart inexplicably pounding in my chest. Scrawled in messy, almost frantic handwriting were 3 words: "I'm here." My breath caught in my throat. I glanced around the lot again, my eyes darting between the rows of darkened pumps and the empty street beyond. But there was noon, just the same. Stillness, the same silence. I could feel my pulse quicken, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. It was probably a joke. I told myself, someone messing around. Maybe it was from earlier in the evening when I'd parked downtown, and I just hadn't noticed it. Until now, that had to be it, right? Still my mind raced with every worst-case scenario. What if someone had been following me, watching me? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I stuffed the note into my pocket and quickly climbed back into the car, locking the doors. As soon as I voice inside, my hands were shaking. As it turned the key in the ignition, I pulled out of the lot faster than I intended, the tire skidding slightly on the pavement. As I hit the road, my heart was still pounding, my eyes flicking to the rear view mirror every few seconds, nothing, just the empty road behind me. But that didn't stop the feeling that I was being followed, watched as I drove. I couldn't stop thinking about the note. The words were burned into my mind, repeating over and over again. I'm here. Who would do something like that? And why? The road stretched out before me. Long and dark, the streetlights few and far between. Every time I passed through a patch of light, it felt exposed, like I was stepping into someone's line of sight. Each shadow seemed to shift, morphing into something more menacing, more sinister. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, but the road remained dark. I wasn't that far from home, 15 minutes, maybe less, but it felt like every mile was dragging on for hours. Hands were gripping the steering wheels so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe some teenager thought it'd be funny to leave a creepy note on a random car. Maybe someone to spook people at the gas station for kicks. But no matter how much it tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching, merely watching me. Then as I approached the last stretch of road before my house, a white car was pulled over on the side of the road, its headlights off, barely visible. In the darkness, my heart lurched in my chest as I drove past, looking over at the vehicle for a split second. I thought as of someone sitting in the driver's seat, their figure barely illuminated by the faint light from my car's headlights. I forced myself to keep driving, my hands trembling on the wheel. I pulled into my driveway, my heart still racing, and shut off the engine. My house was dark as expected, with only the porch light casting a small pool of light over the front door. The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet. Even though I was home, the feeling of unease hadn't gone away. If anything, it had grown worse. I grabbed my things and stepped out of the car, my eyes darting around the yard, the street, and the shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally long under the faint street lights. But then I saw it, another note tucked under the same windshield wiper where the first had been. My blood ran cold. As I slowly approached the car, me breath coming in shallow gas. I hadn't been out of the car for more than a few minutes, and yet somehow there it was, another folded piece of paper, just like before. My hands were trembling as I pulled it out, my mind racing with questions. So when I unfolded the note, my heart pounding in my chest, and read the words, "It told you I'm here. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, my vision blurred for a moment as a wave of nausea washed over. This wasn't a prank. This was some random note left in a whim. Someone had followed me. Someone had been watching me this whole time. I quick unlocked the front door, rushing inside and locking it behind me. I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath, my heart hammering in my chest. My mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened. How had they followed me? How had they gotten that second note on my car so quickly, and where were they now? I paced the living room, watching out the window, every few seconds half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows, but the street outside was empty, as silent and still as it had been before. I pulled out my phone, hesitating for a moment before dialing 911. I didn't know what else to do. Someone had followed me home, someone had left those notes, and I wasn't taking any chances. The operator answered quickly, her voice calm and professional. 911, what's your emergency? I think someone's been following me, I stammered, my voice shaking. They left notes on my cart, whispered. At a gas station, and now we're at my house. Are you in a safe place? Right now, she's Tertuna steady. Yeah, I'm inside my house. Stay inside, lock all the doors. We're sending someone out to your location. It thanked her before hanging up. My mind was racing. It tried to think of who could have done this. I didn't have enemies. I didn't know anyone who would do something like this to mess with me. I moved to the window again, carefully pulling back the curtain just enough to see outside the car I had seen earlier. The one parked on the side of the road was now in front of my house. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the car's headlights, still off, its figure barely visible in the dark. The engine was off, but I could see the outline of someone sitting in the driver's seat. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. Whoever it was, they were waiting. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding so loudly that I could hear it in my ears. The silence in the house was deafening. I grabbed my phone again, my fingers shaking as I dialed 911 for the second time that night. Please, I whispered when the operator answered. Someone's outside my house. My hands shook as I gripped the phone tightly, waiting for the operator to pick up. I could barely breathe, my heart pounding so hard in my chest that I thought it might burst. The car was still sitting there motionless, but I could feel the presence of the person inside watching me. The whole situation felt like something out of a nightmare. I couldn't wake up from 911. What's your emergency? The operator's voice came through the phone, calm and professional, but I was too panicked to keep it together. There's someone outside my house, I whispered, my voice trembling. They've been following me. I think they're watching me right now. Are you inside your home with the doors locked? I replied, glancing around the dark living room. The windows felt too exposed. I moved to the hallway, trying to find somewhere safer, somewhere where I couldn't be seen. Stay calm, officers are already on their way. Keep the doors and windows locked and stay away from any exposed areas. Do you have any weapons or anything you could use to protect yourself? I don't think, just please hurry. I peeked out of the small window next to the door, just enough to see the carrot was still there, parked in front of the house. But now the driver's side door was open. My blood ran cold. He was as out of the car. Don't engage with the individual, the operator warned, sensing my fear. Stay hidden, stay on the line, and wait for the officers to arrive. I backed away. From the window, my breath coming in short gasps. It felt like a trapped animal. My house, which usually felt like a safe haven, now felt like a prison. Every creak of the floorboards, every shift of the shadows outside made my skin crawl. It felt like I was being hunted. Then I heard a soft knock at the front door. It wasn't loud or forceful, but it sent a wave of terror coursing through my body, the kind of knock that said, I know you're in there, come out, I hear him. I whispered into the phone, trying to keep my voice steady. He's knocking. The operator's voice remained calm. Stay where you are, help is almost there. Don't answer the door. I clenched my teeth, backing further into the hallway, my hand gripping the phone like it was my lifeline. My thoughts raced. What if he tried to break in? What if the police didn't get there in time? The knocking continued, slow and rhythmic, as if the person outside was in a hurry. He knew I was scared. He wanted me, but then through the eerie silence, I heard something else. It wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from the window, near the living room, the faintest sound of scratching like fingernails dragging across the glass. I whipped around, my heart hammering in my chest as it moved closer to the hall. Knock on the door stopped, replaced by the soft, deliberate scraping at the window. My legs felt like they might give out beneath me, and I clutched my phone, whispering into it, as if the operator could somehow save me. He's at the window. Now I choked out, barely able to speak. The operator stayed calm, but I could hear the urgency in her voice. Now officers are right around the corner. Stay hidden, stay quiet. I moved to the back of the house, my back pressed against the wall. As I listened, the scraping continued, soft and persistent, moving from one window to the next. I pictured him moving along the side of the house, checking each window, searching for a way. In the seconds stretched into what felt like hours, and I was certain that a tiny moment, I'd heard the sound of glass breaking, the sound of him forcing his way inside, but just as my fear reached its peak, I heard something else, something that made my heart skip, the sound of sirens in the distance for the first time in what felt like an eternity. I allowed myself to hope the police were close, they'd be here any second. The scratching stopped. I waited, my breath caught in my throat, listened for any sign of movement, any indication that he was still out there, but the silence had returned. The only sound, now the wail of the approaching sirens. Finally, the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the room, pulling it open. Just as the officers stepped out of their squad car, he was here. I blurted, my voice is shaking. He was right outside. One of the officers nodded, motioning for me to stay back. We'll check the area, stay inside, and lock the door behind you. I died as I was told, retreating back. Into the house, they searched the yard, their flashlights sweeping over every inch of the property. I watched from the window, my heart still racing, but they didn't find anything after about half an hour. One of the officers returned to the door. We didn't find anyone, he said, his expression calm but concerned. Are you sure he was here? I'm sure, I insisted. He left most of the money at the gas station, and one. Here the officer nodded. We'll file our report and keep an eye on the area. If you see anything else, don't hesitate to call. He nodded, trying to stay composed, but the reality of what had just happened was still sinking, and someone had been watching me, following me, and now they were gone. Without a trace after the officers left, I locked every door and window, double-checking each one, making sure that nothing and noon could get eyes on the couch. My knees pulled to my chest, staring at the front door, but the house was silent. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that whoever had been watching me wasn't finished. They hadn't been caught, they hadn't been stopped, and they knew where I lived for the next few nights. I barely slept. Every creak, every gust of wind, every small noise sent my heart racing. I kept the blinds closed, the doors locked, and the lights on. But the worst part was the uncertainty. I didn't know who it was. I didn't know why they had targeted me, why they had followed me home, why they left those notes. Working the night shift at a gas station was never something I imagined myself doing. It wasn't the kind of job you bragged about, but the hours fit my schedule and the money was decent. Plus, most nights were quiet, just met the hum of their refrigerators and the occasional late-night traveler looking for coffee or cigarettes, so the isolation didn't bother me at first. In fact, I kind of liked it. There was something peaceful about the stillness of the night, the way the world seemed to slow down while everyone else was asleep. But that changed when he started showing up. It was a Tuesday night. When I first noticed him, I was behind the counter, going through the motions, restocking the snack, as whipping down the counters when he walked in. I didn't think much of him. At the time, he was just another late-night customer, tall, scruffy, dressed in a worn-out jacket that looked like it had seen better day. His hair was messy, and he had this wild look in his eye. But they've seen plenty of weirdos working this shift. I didn't say anything as she walked through the door, didn't even look in my direction. He just headed straight to the back of the store, toward the coolers where we kept the drinks. I went back to what I was doing, thinking he'd grab something and be on his way like everyone else. But he didn't. Instead, he just stood there in front of the coolers, staring at the rows of drinks, not moving, not making any attempt to pick something up. I glanced up from the counter, feeling a little uneasy. You need help finding something, I called, trying to sound casual. Hadn't answered, didn't even acknowledge I'd spoken. He just stood there, his back to me, his head lightly tilted, like he was lost in thought. I shrugged it off. Maybe he was one of those guys who took forever to make a decision. It wasn't that unusual. After a few more minutes, though, I started to get a little irritated. I mean, it wasn't like we had an endless selection. Grab a soda or a bottle of water and move on. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he turned and walked to the counter with a bottle of water in hand, his eyes met mine. Asha placed it on the counter, and for the first time, I got a good look at his face. There was something off about him, something. I couldn't quite put my finger on. His eyes were wide, too wide, and they didn't blink. His skin looked pale, almost sickly under the fluorescent lights, and there was this faint, unsettling smile on his lips, a forced, appalled smile, and rang him up. That'll be $1.75. He didn't respond, just stared at me for a second longer before reaching into his pocket and pulling out a crumpled dollar bill and some loose change. I handed him his receipt, and he turned without a word, walking out the door. I watched as he disappeared into the night, the automatic doors sliding shut behind him. The uneasy feeling lingered, but I shook it off. Weird, sure, but nothing to lose. Sleep over. The next night he came back. It was around the same time, just after midnight. I was in the backrest stocking the shelves when I heard the chime of the door opening. I stepped out from behind the shelves, expecting to see trucker or maybe someone coming off the highway for gas. But it was him, same jacket, same messy hair, same blank stare. He didn't look at me. He walked in, didn't greet me or acknowledge me in any way. He just headed straight to the back to the coolers like he had the night before. I watched him from behind the counter, my stomach twisting with that same uneasy feeling from the night before. This time Head didn't even pretend to browse. He just stood in front of the coolers, staring through the glass at the drinks, not moving, not touching anything. Just standing there, me fingers drummed nervously on the counter. Need any help? I called out, hoping maybe that would snap him out of whatever trance he was in, that thing. I looked at these security cameras, wouldn't have much of a setup, just a couple of cheap cameras covering the front of the store and the gas pumps outside, but it felt better knowing they were there, just in case. After a few more minutes of silence, he finally grabbed a bottle of water, just like the night before, and walked up to the counter. The same blank expression, the same wide-eyed stare. This time his hand shook slightly as she handed Meth the money, and I noticed his fingernails were dirty like he'd been digging in the dirt. I forced a smile and handed him his change. Here you go. Again, no response. He turned and left without a word. I watched him walk out, my eyes following. Hamash dice appeared into the night. I waited for the familiar sound of a car starting, but it never came. That's when I realized I hadn't seen him drive up. I had walked here by the third night I was Wunge. He came in just after midnight again. And by this point, I knew something was seriously wrong. This wasn't just some random guy stopping by for a late night drink. This was something else, something much more unsettling. When he walked through the door this time, I didn't even bother asking if he needed help. I stayed behind the counter, my hands gripping the edges as I watched him move through the store. Hadn't got to the coolers this time. Instead, he wandered around the aisles, his footsteps slow and deliberated, didn't touch anything, didn't grab anything off the shelf. He just walked, moving in a strange circular pattern around the store. My heart pounded in my chest. As I watched him, what the hell was he doing? Every few minutes, he would glance over at me, his eyes wide and unblinking, that faint unsettling smile still on his lips. It tried to act normal, tried to focus on the register and the paperwork in front of me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me. When he finally walked up to the counter, He didn't have anything in his hand. She just stood there staring at me. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Can I help you? For the first time he spoke. I've been watching you. His voice was low, raspy. My stomach dropped, and every instinct in my body screamed at me to get away from him. It forced a nervous laugh. That's not something you should say to someone. His smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. I've been watching you every night. It felt the blood drain from my face. My mind raced, trying to figure out how to get them out of the store, how to get them away from me. I think you should leave, I said, my voice shaking. Now wouldn't move. He just stood there staring at me with those wide, unblinking eyes. The air felt thick, heavy with tension, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I'm calling the police, I said, reaching for the phone behind the counter. That's when he turned and walked out, disappearing into the night without another word. I didn't see him for a few nights after that, but the fear lingered. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, checking the camera every few minutes, waiting for him to show up again. And then on the fifth night, he came. Back I was behind the counter when, as a whim, stepped out of the shadows in the parking lot. It wasn't inside the store this time. He was standing just outside under the dim light of the gas station, canopy staring through the glass doors. My heart raced as I watched him, his figure still and motionless like a statue, hadn't moved, didn't make any attempt to come inside. He just stood there, watching. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking. As I explained the situation to the operator, I kept my eyes on him, the whole time watching for any sign of movement. The operator told me to stay on the line and that they were sending someone out. Didn't move. Minutes felt like hours. As I waited for the police to arrive, my eyes never left him, and he never stopped staring. The fear in my chest grew with each passing second, a suffocating weight pressing down on me. Finally, I saw the flashing lights of a police car pulling into the parking lot. The officer stepped out, shining a flashlight toward the man, but when the light hit the spot where he'd been standing, he was gone. There was not a trace of him, no footprints, no sign that he had ever been there. The officer searched the area, but it was like he had vanished into thin air. I quit the job the next day. It was late, much later than I'd planned to be out, but after the week I'd had, all I wanted was a little escape. I'd taken the back roads, the kind that stretch on for miles with nothing but dark fields. I was looking for the silence, the empty roads, the freedom of being alone with my thoughts. I'd been driving for nearly 2 hours, and the gas gauge on my dashboard was creeping dangerously close to empty. I wasn't worried though. I'd passed through this area before, and I knew there was a small gas station up ahead, the kind of place that's barely more than a shack with a couple of pumps and a flickering neon sign. It was old, run down, and probably the last place you'd want to stop at night, but it was reliable. When I finally spotted the faint glow off the station's sign in the distance. A wave of relief washed over me. The engine sputtered a little as I pulled into the lot, the tire scrunching over the gravel. The place was empty as expected. There was only one car parked on the side of the building, an old attendant that looked like it had been there for years. I parked by one of the pumps and turned off the engine, the sudden silence making my ears ring. The fluorescent lights above the station buzzed softly, flickering in and out like they were struggling to stay alive. I grabbed my wallet and stepped out of the car, the cool night air sending a slight shiver down my spine. The station was just as I remembered, it isolated, dreary, and barely functional. The convenience store looked closed, its windows dark, but the pumps were still on, and that's all I cared about. As it started pumping gas, I glanced around, feeling more aware of my surroundings than I normally would. There was something about being out here in the middle of nowhere that made me feel vulnerable. Maybe it was the emptiness of the place, or maybe it was just the darkness around. Either way, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping into the pit of my stomach, and that's when, as a whim at first, it thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, dim lighting the shadows cast by the flickering neon sign. It wouldn't have been the first time. I'd imagined something that wasn't really there, but as if focused is a whim. Clearly, a man was standing by the side of the building near the old sedan. He was partially hidden in the shadows, his body hunched over like he was trying to keep himself out of sight. I hadn't noticed him when I pulled in, and the realization that he'd been there the whole time made my heart skip a beat. I kept my eyes on him, trying not to seem obvious, but I could feel my pulse quicken. He was just standing there watching me. I told myself he was probably just another driver who had stopped for gas, maybe taking a break before getting back on the road, but something about the way he was positioned, the way he didn't move or make any effort to approach the pumps, made me uneasy. It turned my back on him, focusing on the number staken up on the gas pump. Just get the gas. It told myself, get the gas and get out of here. But then I heard it, footsteps. They were slow, crunching over the gravel like they were being made on purpose, like whoever was making them wanted me to hear. I looked back, and there he was walking toward me. His steps were unhurried, casual, like he wasn't in any kind of rush. He was tall, with dirty, disheveled hair and clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. His face was partially obscured by the shadows, but even from a distance, I could see the wild look in his eyes. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to get in the car and leave, but I froze. Something about the way he was ward. We made it clear that this wasn't going to be a normal interaction. "Hey man," he called out, his voice raspy and low. "Can you help me out?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "What do you need?" He stopped a few feet away from me, his eyes locking onto mine for a moment. That didn't say anything. He just stood there staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "My car broke down," he said, finally jerking his thumb over his shoulder toward the beat-up sedan. "It's just down the road. I need a ride." My heart was pounding in my chest. The way he said it, it didn't sound like a request, it sounded like a demand. "I don't know, man." He stammered, "I'm kind of in a hurry." His eyes narrowed and his lips curled into a strange, unsettling smile. "Come on, man, just a quick ride." It's not fair. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to say not to get in the car and drive away as fast as I could, but something about the way he was looking at me, those wild, unblinking eyes, made me feel trapped, like I didn't have a choice. "I really can't," I said, forcing the words out. "I'm running late. Maybe there's someone else who can help." His smile fade, and for a second I saw something flicker across his face, like he was deciding whether or not to get angry. Then he stepped closer. "You're just going to leave me out?" He hissed, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "You think I'm lying or something?" It took a step back, my heart racing. "No, I'm in a rush, that's all." He took another step forward, closing the distance between us. "You think I'm going to hurt you?" At that moment, I knew I had to get out of the My mind was racing, trying to come up with an excuse, a way to diffuse the situation without making him angrier, but I couldn't think. All I could focus on was the pounding of my heart, the rush of adrenaline flooding my veins. I said, trying to sound calm, "I just don't have time." Before he could respond, I pulled the gas pump nozzle from my car and fumbled with it, my hand shaking. I could feel his eyes on me, feel the tension building between uses. It tried to move as quickly as possible. "Hey," he shouted suddenly, his voice filled with anger. "Don't walk away from me." I didn't look back. I couldn't. I shoved the nozzle back into the pump and practically dove into my car, slamming the door shut and locking it in one fluid motion. My hands were trembling so badly that it took me a second to jam the key into the ignition, and for a horrifying moment, I thought the engine wouldn't start, but then it roared to life, and I slammed my foot on the gas, pulling out of the parking lot. As fast as I could, I sped down the dark, empty road. In the rear view mirror, I could see him standing there, his figure growing smaller as I drove away. He didn't chase after me. He didn't shout. He just stood there staring at my car, watching me leave. I didn't stop driving until I reached a well-lit area as mauled that was still open late into the night. My hands were still shaking as I parked the car and sat there for a few minutes, trying to calm myself down. I couldn't get his face out of my head, those eyes. The way he looked at me like he was sizing me, like he was deciding whether or not to do something terrible. For weeks after that night, I couldn't drive by a gas station without feeling a pit of dread in my stomach. I found myself glancing over my shoulder whenever it filled up, scanning the area for anyone who looked even remotely suspicious. I knew it was irrational. He couldn't have followed me. He didn't even have a car, but the fear lingered like a dark cloud that I couldn't shake sometimes late at night. I still think about him. I wonder what he was really planning was. He just a desperate guy looking for a riddy, or was there something more sinister behind those eyes? I'll never know for sure. But one thing's certain, I'll never forget the feeling of being trapped in that gas station parking lots, staring into the eyes of a stranger who was anything but normal. I've always liked the late night shift at the gas station. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when the world falls silent and all you have are your thoughts and the hum of the neon lights most of the time. The customers were few and far between, the occasional truckers topping for coffee, or a pack of cigarettes, a tired traveler looking for directions, but nothing out of the ordinary. That's why when the door chimed that night just after 1 a.m., I didn't think much of it. I was leaning against the counter, idly scrolling through my phone when the sound broke the quiet. I glanced up and saw him, and disheveled and dirty, his clothes worn and frayed. He looked like he'd been on the road for a long time. And he carried with him an air of desperation, a kind of heaviness that immediately made me uneasy. I watched him for a second, trying to gauge whether he was just a drifter passing through or something else, something more dangerous. Hadn't acknowledged me when he came in, just shuffled down the first aisle, his boots scuffing against the worn linoleum floor. His hair was long and greasy, hanging in tangled strands over his face, and he moved with a sluggishness that felt wrong. It shook off the creeping feeling that something was off. People came in here looking rough all the time. It was part of the job, something about the way he carried himself that made me keep one eye on him. As she wandered through the store, he didn't pick anything up, didn't look at the shelves or browse the snacks like most people did. Instead, he just wandered, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he was waiting for something, watching for something. It tried to go back to my phone, pretending like I wasn't paying attention to him, but my gut wouldn't let me. I kept tracking his movements as she paced between the aisles. She stopped a few times, his back to me, standing perfectly still, staring at whatever was in front of him for longer than felt normal. The hairs on the back of my necks. "To done, can I help you find something?" If and all he asked, forcing my voice to sound casual, though my heart was starting to pound. A little faster. He didn't respond. He didn't even move, as if he hadn't heard me. I was about to ask again when he slowly turned his head toward me, his eyes catching mine through the gap between the shelves. His face was pale, gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes that made him look half dead. "No," he muttered, his voice gravely and low. "I'm just looking." He nodded, though his answer did nothing to ease the tension coiling in my chest. "All right, just let me know if you need anything." Hadn't respond. Instead, he turned away and continued his aimless wandering. Minutes passed, and I found myself growing more and more anxious with each second that ticked by. There was something unsettling about the way he moved, the way he lingered in the aisles without touching anything. I glanced at the clock above the door, willing the time to move faster, hoping that he would just grab something and leave, but he didn't. When he finally made his way back toward the front, I felt a small wave of relief, hoping that this weird encounter was over. He stopped by the cooler, opened it, and pulled out a can of energy drink. Slowly, he walked toward the counter, his eyes never leaving mine as she set the drink down. I could see his hands trembling slightly. I ranged it up as quickly as I could, my fingers feeling stiff as they tapped at the register. The silence between us was suffocating. "That'll be 250s. I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He fumbled with his pocket, pulling out a crumpled Fire 5 bill. It took the money. Her fingers brushed, and it felt how cold his skin was, far too cold for someone who had just come in from the mild night air. I handed him his change, hoping that was the end of it, but instead of leaving, he just stood there staring at me, his eyes hollow and dark. "You work here every night?" asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt my stomach twist most nights. I laid, hoping he wouldn't ask for more details. Slowly, as if processing the information must be lonely. "Not really," I said, quickly, my hand instinctively reaching for the phone under the counter, just in case I liked the quiet. The drifter didn't respond. He just stared at me for a few more seconds, the silence stretching between us like a taut wire ready to snap. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out the door, the chime ringing as she left. I didn't realize how tense I had been until he was gone. The moment the door closed, I let out a long breath, my body sagging with relief. I glanced at the clock again. Only 2 more hours until my shift ended. I could make it, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that lingered after his visit. Something about him had felt like he was hiding something beneath the surface. It tried to go back to my routines, sweeping the floor, restocking the shelves, but the unease stayed with me, gnawing at the back of my mind. I kept glancing out the window, but the parking lot was empty, just the dim glow of the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. About an hour. I was starting to calm. The door chimed again, and there he was. The drifter stood in the doorway, his eyes locked onto me. As she stepped inside, my heart skipped a beat, and that familiar sense of dread washed over me. He wasn't holding anything this time, didn't make any pretense of browsing the store. He just walked straight toward the counter. Back again. I asked for Sing Ismail, though my hand had begun to tremble. He didn't respond. Instead, he stopped right in front of the counter, too close, his eyes boring into mine. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and oppressive, and I was strapped behind the counter. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice shakier than I intended. But it wasn't a friendly smile. It was cold, malicious, like he knew something. You don't belong here. He said, his voice low and chilling. He swallowed hard, my throat dry. "What are you talking about?" His smile widened, and he leaned in closer. "You think you're safe here, but you're not. Nuns." Safe. My heart was racing now, the fear creeping up my spine like cold fingers. I glanced toward the security camera, shopping he'd notice, hoping it would deter him, but didn't seem to care. His eyes followed mine, and for a moment I thought they might laugh. It took a step back, my fingers cinching toward the phone under the counter. "You need to leave," Zed, trying to sound authoritative, though my voice cracked slightly. His smile faded and his expression darkened. He stepped closer to the counter, his hands gripping the edge. As she leaned forward, or what he asked, his voice dripping with malice. I felt a surge of panic rise in my chest. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. He was bigger than me, stronger, and there was noon around to help. The parking lot was empty, the roads deserted. It was just him and me. I reached for the phone, my hand trembling as I dialed 911. But before I could press send, he lunged forward, grabbing my wrist with a force that made me gaze. His grip was tight. The fingers scolded and unyielding. "Don't," the growled, his eyes wild with fury. It froze me, heart pounding in my chest as I stared at him. His face was inches from mine, his breath hot and foul. I could see the anger in his eyes, the way his body tensed like he was ready to snap for a moment. I thought they might hurt me. I thought they might do something terrible, but then just as suddenly as she had grabbed me, he let go. He straightened up, his expression unreadable as she stepped back. "You're lucky," he muttered, his voice low and dangerous, "but next time you won't be." And with that, he turned and walked out, the door disappearing into the night. It stood there for a long time after he left, my heart still racing, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. I wanted to believe it was over, that he was gone, but the fear lingered. His words echoed in my mind, haunting me. I didn't finish the shift. I couldn't. I locked up early, called my boss, and told him what had happened. He told me to go home, that he'd call the police and have them check the cameras, but even after I left the gas station and drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching, still waiting. I quit the J. A few days later, I couldn't bring myself to go back. Note after what happened, I never saw again, but I knew who was out there somewhere. And I wonder if one day I'll run into him again. If these stories made your skin crawl, don't forget to hit that like button and share the chills with your friends. If you're craving more terrifying tales that will keep you up at night, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Drop a comment below and let us know which story gave you the chills the most, and if you've had your own creepy encounter, we'd love to hear about.